The real incident of 1996 Mount Everest disaster. If you like our videos, please subscribe my YouTube channel. Mount Everest, the highest peak on Earth, stands as a symbol of both human ambition and the relentless power of nature. In the spring of 1996, the mountain's allure drew a multitude of climbers, each driven by the desire to conquer its summit. Among them were the prominent commercial expeditions, one led by Rob Hull, a renowned New Zealand climber and owner of Adventure Consultants, and the other by Scott Fisher, an American mountaineer who headed Mountain Madness. Both were seasoned guides with a wealth of experience on Everest, but even their expertise couldn't fully prepare them for what lay ahead. As the climbing season commenced, Everest was teeming with activity. The increasing commercialization of the mountain had led to a surge in climbers, many of whom were relatively inexperienced and heavily reliant on their guides. Hull and Fisher's expeditions were no exception, composed of a mix of seasoned climbers and ambitious clients who had paid hefty sums for the chance to reach the top of the world. The climbers spent weeks acclimatizing to the altitude, moving between the lower camps on the mountain to prepare their bodies for the extreme conditions they would face higher up. Acclimatization is a critical process, as the air becomes thinner with every step upward, reducing the amount of oxygen available and putting immense strain on the human body. The climbers knew that once they reached the so-called death zone above 26,000 feet, every breath would become a struggle, and their decision-making abilities could be severely impaired. The summit push was planned for May 10, 1996, a date carefully chosen based on weather forecasts that promised a brief window of relatively calm conditions. The climbers set out from Camp 4, situated at 26,000 feet on the South Col, in the early hours of the morning. The temperature was brutally cold, and the air was so thin that even the most basic tasks required immense effort. But spirits were high. The summit was within reach. As the climbers ascended, they encountered one of the first obstacles that would later prove deadly: traffic jams. The narrow route to the summit was clogged with climbers from multiple expeditions, all vying for their chance to stand on the top. This congestion caused significant delays, forcing many climbers to spend precious hours in the death zone, where their bodies were rapidly deteriorating due to the lack of oxygen. Despite these delays, some climbers did manage to reach the summit. Among them were Rob Hull, who guided his client Doug Hansen to the top, and Scott Fisher, who was battling exhaustion but determined to make it. The moment of triumph, however, was fleeting. As the climbers began their descent, the weather, which had been relatively stable, took a sudden and devastating turn. A powerful blizzard swept across the mountain, bringing with it howling winds, plummeting temperatures, and near-zero visibility. The climbers, already weakened by the altitude, were now facing an even more dire situation. They were caught high on the mountain, exposed to the full fury of the storm, and with their strength waning, the descent became a race against time. Rob Hull, who had stayed on the summit longer than planned to assist Doug Hansen, was one of those caught in the storm. Hansen, physically and mentally spent, was unable to continue his descent. Hull, known for his dedication to his clients, refused to leave him behind. He radioed for help, but the conditions were so severe that rescue attempts were nearly impossible. As the hours dragged on, Hull and Hansen remained stranded near the summit, battling the elements in their own failing bodies. Meanwhile, Scott Fisher, who had also stayed too long on the summit, was descending alone. He was suffering from severe altitude sickness and exhaustion. His condition rapidly deteriorated, and he eventually collapsed on the descent, unable to go any further. Fisher's Sherpa, Lobsang Jangbu, tried desperately to help him, but the storm was relentless. Fisher was left behind, too weak to continue. As the night wore on, the storm intensified. Climbers from both expeditions were now scattered across the upper reaches of the mountain, many of them disoriented and struggling to survive. In the darkness and confusion, several climbers became lost, wandering off the main route and into even more perilous terrain. Some, including Yasuko Namba, a Japanese climber from Hull's expedition, collapsed from exhaustion and cold, never to rise again. By morning, the storm had subsided, revealing the full extent of the disaster. 8 climbers had lost their lives, including Rob Hull, Doug Hansen, Scott Fisher, and Yasuko Namba. Hull's last radio transmission, a heartbreaking call to his wife in New Zealand, encapsulated the tragedy of the situation. His body, like many others, remained on the mountain, a somber reminder of the dangers that climbers face in their quest to conquer Everest. The 1996 Mount Everest disaster was a stark illustration of the unpredictable nature of high-altitude climbing. It highlighted the thin line between triumph and tragedy, the profound respect that the mountain demands, and the human cost of pursuing such an unforgiving goal. In the aftermath, the climbing community grappled with the lessons to be learned. the importance of strict turnaround times, the dangers of overcrowding, and the need for better communication and decision-making in the face of adversity.
For those who survived, the experience was life-altering. John Krakauer, a journalist and climber who was part of Hall's expedition, later chronicled the events in his book Into Thin Air, which brought widespread attention to the disaster and sparked debate about the ethics of commercial climbing on Everest. The families of those who perished were left to mourn their loved ones, grappling with the devastating reality that the dream of Everest had come at an unimaginable cost. Everest remains as deadly and inspiring as ever, drawing climbers from around the world who are willing to risk everything for a chance to stand on its summit. The events of 1996 serve as a haunting reminder of the mountain's power and the enduring allure that continues to drive people to its icy slopes. In the end, the story of the Mount Everest disaster is not just about loss and tragedy, but also about the human spirit's relentless pursuit of achievement, even in the face of overwhelming odds.